Welcome, everybody, to another amazing episode of the One Fear Per Year podcast, where we hold each other's hands through this messy thing called life and give each other ideas and encouragement to walk through our fears to live our most amazing life. And today, I am really excited because I have Kevin Joyce with me. Thank you for joining me, Kevin.
Pleasure to be with you.
I am excited to dive right in, and I want to hear how fear has impacted you personally. Like, let's say in the last decade or so,
Yeah.
how
Well,
how has fear kind of shown up in your life?
can I give a little context for sort of where I'm coming from?
Absolutely.
So, partly what's relevant to this is that I have such a weird job in life. I live on an island in the middle of the woods off Seattle, but I travel all over the place doing a variety of different things. I'm an artist and a performer and a musician, but I'm also an organizational consultant on stress and team building. And I lead executive level meetings on high strategy, and I do fundraising events. And then my wife and I, Martha Ensign, who have our company together, create art and theater and for large corporate events and for public events. So I have lots of context and different vectors through which I sort of look at the angle of fear, in addition, of course, to just being a person who this year turned 60. And that really, right, made it this far. That really informs a lot of sort of how I understand and feel my own fear. I mean, I was thinking about this question, Janice, and I sort of came up with at least 5 different major fears that I've walked through. And I know you have 1 fear per year, and it feels more like 5 per year or 1 per week. I'm not sure how to think about it. But I'll just list them off, and maybe you can go back and think about them. So I gave that framework of my work because as a um, as a performer, there's a whole bunch of types of fear to work through that are really endemic to people who become performers and also to the different types of performance work that I do. As a corporate trainer and a speaker and a presenter, there's a whole other type of fears. As a father of a 22-year-old, there's a whole other type of fears. And all of them have to be, you talk about walking through them or working through them. In a way, they all have to be embraced. And so, in part, that's my first clue or my first cue. So when I was thinking about this, in my life, I think the principal fear that I've had to work through, and it's been as relevant in the last 10 years as it always been, is not being liked. And I know that's relevant to work that you do, but for me, that's been, as much as a performer and as a person, as a youngest child, essentially not getting enough, not being enough, maybe initially going into the work of being a performer, an actor, a comedian, a writer, a musician, for the sake of getting the accolades. You're good. I really love your work. Oh my God, that was amazing. For the longest time, that mattered. And at some point, maybe when I was 40, maybe when I was 45, that didn't matter as much anymore. And I realized, and this is a really important part of all of my strategies around fear, apart from time being a strategy, like it takes time during which and after which you build confidence, you build self-awareness, and mostly the strategy that became most relevant after it didn't matter so much that I was being told I was good because I knew I was good enough was being in service to others. And the epidemic of isolation that we have is best solutioned in the most simplistic and I don't think Pollyannish way by stepping into our capacity to be in service to others. Because when we're thinking about how can I help? What does this person need? How can I help this person be at their best? Which is a lot of what you're doing. It tends to reduce narcissism and the focus on me, and I'm so afraid, and this is what I need, and I have to work through my fears. And it makes it about how can I help the world? And just cognitively, neuroscientifically, neurotransmitterly, you experience less fear because there's a different relationship to purpose. So I'll keep going if you want.
Well, you said so many good things right there. Um, let's talk about this fear of not being good enough, because I don't know if I'm right in this or not, but part of me thinks that all of us at some point in our lives struggle with this. Would you agree with
Absolutely.
that?
It's the one I started with because I know that's at the basis. My sense is that that's at the basis of a lot of the work that you do. It's like we have to figure out how to approach and deal with our sense of inadequacy, which is, really basic to human beings.
And how have you done that? Is that something that you've strategically approached, or have you given much thought to that piece of it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I have a, really robust health practice that has to do with well-being in my mind and my body and my eating and my relationships to community. And so all of those have to be in place. I have to be physically healthy. I have to be hydrated. I have to have a good set of self-talk, right? I have to do my own cognitive behavioral therapy where I catch myself saying I stink at something. I catch myself saying I'm not good enough. And the reality is every other people are always better than you at anything you're trying to do. There will always be people better than you, but you have to have in place, if possible, really specific tools and techniques to talk yourself into different self mantras, if you will. And I don't mean that in a religious way. I mean, we just all have loops. We have tape loops, and we may not even be aware of them running. And in fact, they may not be in words. They may be in feelings. They may be in sensations. They may be in just repeated moods. We have to, and this is the first step in emotional self-awareness and emotional intelligence, is we have to be able to catch ourselves when that is happening. And we have to have a replacement for it. We have to have a replacement that is at very least based in whether we are loved and accepted by those around us and whether we are willing to acknowledge that we are learning. And so one of my most important tools and techniques has been transparency and honesty. And when I'm transparent about the fact that I'm learning, and because I'm a performer and I'm a comedian, I do a lot of self-effacing humor, which really helps. And we can be self-effacing without even being humorous by being honest and vulnerable about the fact that we're learning. Audiences, people, organizations, they want to hear that more than they want to hear you bullshitting your way into competence. I mean, fake it till you make it is real, for sure, as is the imperative to be honest and transparent and vulnerable. And if you can do them both, I mean, I think that's the fine line.
Ooh, I really resonate with that because that's something that I've worked on in my own life is
Yeah.
this honesty, and as a performer also, and as a people pleaser and,
Yeah.
a
Totally.
recovering people pleaser. "Oh, what do
Totally.
you need from me? Who should I be for you?"
Totally.
And navigating that whole thing. And to me, a lot of that came down to self-love. So not like self-absorption, but
Right.
truly self-love
Yeah.
for, loving myself first. And from that place, then I was able to love others and step into service. But I
Yeah.
couldn't really step into service very well without loving myself first.
And Janice, I think the thing about loving oneself is that I believe that there are aesthetics in language that are going to apply to different people. And so I would take that and say self love is super important. And there's a whole bunch of people that aren't not going to relate to that way of thinking about it at all. So one of my imperatives, given that I work in corporate audiences and I work with random public and I work with nonprofit audiences and I work with a scientific community and I work with other is that I have to be able to adjust my language to suit my audience. And that doesn't mean being inauthentic. It means being empathetic and aware of the language and the mental models that the people that I am working with occupy. So, in addition to self love, there is self knowledge. And self knowledge can be as important as self love for people who may not indulge as much as you and I do in the realms of emotions as the primary thing. As much as I think everybody's decisions are made on the basis of emotions, a lot of people don't think that way. A lot of people rely on their rationality or rely on things that are not the same as emotional self awareness. But if in order to step into service, someone can arrive at a knowledge of what their value is, a knowledge of what they're good at and what they care about, that can be just as powerful and just as it can be just the same as someone else saying, I need to learn how to love myself. Because frankly, for some people, that does sound narcissistic. It does sound self indulgent and it does sound too emotional. I'm with you on self love as a moniker, rather, and as a way of thinking about it. But I also know that a lot of people are like, yeah, I don't, yeah, right? And
Absolutely.
for those folks, my recommendation is, what do you care about? What are you good at? What does the world need? How can you help give that to the world? Because people who want to figure out what their purpose is may not want to indulge in 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 a process of self-love that just doesn't resonate.
Well, you bring up a really good point, and that's actually something I'm working on even with my speaking, is this concept of merging the head and the heart.
Great, great.
Because as you said, I'm very much a heart-centered, emotional kind of being,
Totally.
and which is fine, I'm not sad about that, but I also want to incorporate the head component and scientific, data and things like that for people that resonate with that more.
Well, and even for yourself, I mean, because I think you see that there is an importance to that. You again, this is a place where like you can know yourself. What fills you? What makes you feel alive? And for you, it's like attention to self-love, but it doesn't mean that it also isn't important to you, like a Venn diagram, to have an understanding of the science, to have an understanding of rationality, because it's important to you to connect with people.
Yes.
Right? So, anyways,
Absolutely.
that's an important one for me. I think the second one that's really related to this is you're gonna relate to, and everyone else does too, imposter syndrome. And I think I've really had to work through imposter syndrome in my work, not as a performer, because I've been a performer my whole life and a musician and an actor and a comedian, and it was pretty clear early on that I'm not an imposter or that everyone is an imposter. That's literally the point of performing. But now I've been in the realm for the last 20 years of being a subject matter expert. And my gosh, are there scholars out there who are smarter and business people who are more successful than me? And this same strategy of knowing myself and attending to what I care about and being honest and transparent about the fact that I'm not an expert, but I'm doing what I'm good at, which is engaging in conversation and paying attention to how people show up. It just so happens that the subject matter area I work on is human communication and engagement. And in that, I am an expert, but I'm not necessarily an expert in the history of the philosophy of it, in the neuroscience of it, even in the organizational complexity of it. I know some things about all those things, but it's really easy to get into the rabbit hole of like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not qualified for this. Why in the world would someone hire me for this? Oh my gosh, I have to do this presentation, and they're gonna think I'm an idiot, which is the same thing as not being liked, right? So imposter syndrome is sort of the professional version of that. And when I pay attention to the fact that these are things that I care about, and the way I go into this conversation is in service to the people I'm working with, it helps me get over that fear.
What other tools or techniques or thoughts do you have for somebody? Let's say they're transitioning from, they used to be in one line of work and now they're heading to do something else. And that initial imposter syndrome, what things should they do to deal with the fear that comes along with change? Because change is the constant in life, and there's a big change in what they do for work. What are just some steps based on your experience that they can take to make that transition a little bit easier?
Well, those are incredibly important questions. And, for me, I take a sort of a whole systems approach to it. So, one of the ways to do it is to have a network of people with whom you are connecting on the things that you don't feel strong about, that they can share, they can bolster, they can be your peeps, they can be your council of elders or just your community. So, if we are most afraid when we are isolated, and we are less afraid when we have our tendrils out to the people that love us, know us, and support us, even if they challenge us, even if they tell us we're full of it, but with whom we have regular communication and we can reach out to them. That's critical. Even if you can reach out to them and say, I'm terrified, I don't know what I'm doing, I fell on my face. They're there for you. They should have they should have content matter expertise. They should know you, and you should have, hopefully, a relationship with them that is diverse. Some of them should just be able to listen to you and love you. Some of them should be able to give you specific techniques. Some of them should give you tough love. If you can have a variety of people in your community that support you in that way, that's great. The other thing that I would say is really important in self-understanding, why are you afraid? Why do you have imposter syndrome? Is to understand the neuroscience of stress, to understand where the threats come from. And you can say, what is this fear? So I have a couple rubrics that I use that I really recommend to other people. And one of them is called the SCARF model, developed by David Rock in Australia, SCARF. And it's basically a way of saying, we've studied why people get afraid and why people react terribly to things. And there's 5 different categories of threat. So I won't go into it too much, but people are threatened because they're made to feel like they don't have status. That's the S. They don't have certainty. They don't have enough information. That's the C. They don't have autonomy. They can't make decisions. That's the A. They don't have relatedness. They don't trust people. That's the R. And things are not fair. That's the F. And so that's a great rubric for understanding, why am I getting so tweaked out by this? Well, gosh, I'm afraid of my status being gone, or I'm afraid I don't have enough information, or I'm afraid I can't, you can understand yourself better by that. And the other part of this rubric is to understand what the types of reactions are in the stress response. And we have fight or flight. We know those two. What does it mean? I either get aggressive or I want to run away. But studies have shown that there's 3 other Fs, which helps. Fight, flight, flop, which is to play dead, right? Just to pretend nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong. Fawn, which is to take care of everybody else's emotions, right? Or freeze, which is deer in the headlights. And so you can achieve an incredible level of understanding that will help you chew through this fear as a technique, as a tool to understand what's going on. Because when you can understand that, oh my God, I feel threatened in my status, like I'm not important enough. And what happens to me is that I just get frozen and my brain doesn't stop. So again, emotional intelligence. What's going on in you emotionally? How does it show up how does it show up in your body and your behavior? And then what can I do to make requests of the world or set the minimum, minimally sufficient conditions for me to thrive, knowing these things about myself. Does that make
Oh,
sense?
yes. And I'm looking into both of those because that's great information. Okay, one question I ask everybody, no wrong answer, just your opinion on what is the exact opposite word of fear. So you hear fear is the opposite of,
Flourish,
what was that?
flourishing.
Flourishing. Okay. Explain a little bit what you mean by that.
Well, flourishing does not mean the absence of fear. And I don't think there needs to be the opposite of fear, because we will never, ever be without fear. We don't want to be without fear. You need to have fear in your life to know what's dangerous, period. I think if you can make the correlation between the stress response, which is how we biologically, physiologically react to threats, and fear, I think those are equivalent. Flourishing is having those conditions in your life so that you are growing, so that you are present, so that you are alive and loved and engaged in meaningful work and learning. And in a way, and I've heard you talk about this, Janice, which is part of flourishing is embracing your fears and embracing and stepping into them so that you can step through them. The way out is through. The way to flourishing is through our fears. And it doesn't mean you have to battle with them all day long, but you have to be able to embrace them. So part of human flourishing is the warts and all understanding of your life, and finding those places and those connective communities where you can be seen and witnessed and see other people and witness them. That is what's so biologically imperative. That's what we're at risk of losing with AI, by the way, is seeing others and being seen. Because if we offload all of our decisions, all our moral decisions, all our practical decisions, we will lose the vulnerability that includes being present with your fears. And that's why, for me, the opposite of fear is not happiness or even courage, but although that's part of it, it's flourishing.
Beautiful answer. Last question, because we're running out of time. But since this is the one fear per year journey, is there something in this next year that you want to do that there's a little trepidation in you, a little fear that you're having to face and walk through in this next year?
Yeah, yeah, it's creating content that is about interactive and immersive experiences, teaching people about how to counter the negative impacts of AI and technology in their lives. And the fear is that imposter syndrome that I just don't know enough. And so I'm going to be diving into all these tools and techniques. What I want to do, and Janice, I've talked to you about this a little bit, and I want to go further in talking to you about it because I know you're stepping into content all the time, is I want to help people think well about how not to get lost in the onslaught of technology and particularly AI from an ethical standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, from a personal standpoint, a communication and relationship standpoint. And I'm afraid I don't know enough. I'm afraid I'm not qualified, but I'm going to do it anyway.
I love it, and trust me, here's the thing, we feel like we're not qualified for certain things. As long as we are one little step ahead of maybe somebody else and we're reaching down our hand to them, then we're there, like, that is the space for us to be, and so you will be reaching down your hand to someone like me who truly has no idea of what's going on in that realm.
Yeah.
So thank you. And thank you for showing up in life authentically, vulnerably, honestly. It really makes a difference. And I know you make a difference in a lot of people's lives. So thank you for joining me.
Oh my God, what a pleasure it is. I've so enjoyed getting to know you, and I know we'll do more.
We will. More to come.
All right.